My ex-husband humiliated me in a way I'll never forget, but what happened after shocked even me. Mariana sat quietly in the corner of the bustling cafe, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The laughter and chatter of the patrons felt distant, like echoes from a world she no longer belonged to. For years, she had lived a life defined by the shadows of her husband's accomplishments and the silent suffering of his subtle, yet relentless, judgments. Thomas was a man who thrived in the spotlight, a charming and successful entrepreneur who had captivated their circle with his charisma and ambition. Mariana, on the other hand, was the soft-spoken woman behind closed doors, the one who bore the brunt of his frustrations and insecurities with quiet grace. Their marriage had been a precarious balance of appearances and deceptions. To outsiders, they were the perfect couple, successful, happy, and accomplished. Yet behind the curtains, Mariana endured countless humiliations that chipped away at her self-worth. It was not just the whispered criticisms or the dismissive glances, but the way Thomas controlled the narrative of their life, keeping her small and invisible. She often found herself questioning her own reality, wondering if her feelings were merely the product of her imagination or insecurity. Tonight was different. The moment she had dreaded for so long finally arrived in the most public and devastating way imaginable. They had gathered at the lavish home of one of Thomas's business partners, an event meant to celebrate his latest venture. As Mariana mingled quietly, hoping to remain unnoticed, the atmosphere shifted abruptly. Thomas, flushed with the arrogance that often preceded his next facade, stood up and cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him. With a cold smile and a voice dripping with mockery, he began recounting details of their marriage, details that were intimate, painful, and meant to diminish her in front of those who admired him. I think it's only fair everyone knows how little Mariana contributed to our success, he sneered, pausing for dramatic effect as laughter rippled through the crowd. She's always been, well, let's just say, the quiet one who never quite measured up. The room filled with chuckles and pitying glances, some from people Mariana had once considered friends. Her heart sank as humiliation tightened its grip, suffocating every ounce of confidence she had left. In that moment, surrounded by strangers and familiar faces alike, Mariana felt utterly alone. The harsh spotlight illuminated not just Thomas's cruelty but also the years of silence she had endured, the compromises she had made to keep the peace. How had she allowed herself to be reduced to this? The sting of betrayal cut deep, but beneath the layers of shame, a flicker of something else began to glow, a fragile ember of defiance. As the final echo of laughter faded, Mariana excused herself, the weight of every whispered word pressing down on her like a physical force. She needed to understand how she had come to be so powerless, to find the strength to face the daunting path ahead. The journey was just beginning, and though her world seemed to be crumbling, she resolved not to let this moment define her. Have you ever witnessed someone break under the weight of cruel judgment, only to discover their resilience hidden beneath the surface? Sometimes, our darkest moments are the ones that reveal who we truly are. After retreating to the solitude of her small apartment, Mariana sank onto the worn-out couch, the silence wrapping around her like a comforting blanket and yet amplifying the storm inside her. Her hands trembled as she replayed the evening's cruel scene over and over in her mind. The guests' laughter, Thomas's biting words, the sharp, dismissive tone in his voice, it all echoed relentlessly. She could feel the heat of embarrassment rise in her cheeks, only to be replaced by a cold numbness seeping through her veins. It was as if the woman she once was had suddenly become a ghost, invisible even to herself. Days passed in a blur marked by restless nights and quiet mornings where she barely moved from the spot beside the window. Conversations with friends had dwindled. She feared their pity more than their absence. It wasn't just the public humiliation that hurt, it was the suffocating invisibility, the way every attempt she made to speak was either twisted or ignored. Yet beneath the bruising weight of shame, there lingered a stubborn ember of anger. Not just the anger at Thomas for his betrayal, but at herself for accepting such a fate. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered weakly through the lace curtains, Mariana sat at her cluttered desk sorting through old photographs and letters, remnants of a love story she'd once believed in. The pictures were taken before the cracks appeared, before Thomas's charm soured into cruelty. Smiling faces stared back at her, ghosts from a happier past. It was during this silent reckoning that she realized just how deeply she'd buried her own identity beneath the roles imposed on her: wife, supporter, background character. The days that followed became a strange dance between self-doubt and the beginnings of self-discovery. She began to read books she had once shelved away, books about women's empowerment, resilience, and reclaiming one's narrative. There was a chapter on finding strengths in unexpected places that resonated deeply. Slowly, she started journaling her thoughts, each word a brushstroke painting a portrait of a woman ready to rise. But even this process was haunted by the pervasive question: was it too late to rebuild after such public defeat? Her small circle of acquaintances had become a battleground for opinions. Some whispered behind her back, others overtly judged her quiet weakness, convinced she'd never stand up for herself. In moments of despair, she wondered if letting go would be simpler than fighting. Yet every time she closed her eyes, Thomas's mocking face flashed, reminding her that surrender was not an option. If nothing else, she owed herself the dignity of resistance. One evening, an unexpected phone call disrupted her solitude. It was Lila, a mutual friend who had always seen the woman beneath the silence. "Mariana, I don't know what happened tonight, but I see you. And I want to help you see yourself the way I do," Lila said softly. The conversation was a balm, a reminder that she wasn't as alone as she felt. They spoke at length about hope, about the power of reclaiming one's story. It was the first genuine connection that evening, a small but vital step towards healing. Yet even as she began to gain footing, the shadows of her past refused to stay buried. A chance discovery while clearing out an old cabinet unearthed a folder filled with letters and contracts, pieces of information Thomas had kept secret, his public persona built on lies as fragile as glass. One letter hinted at unethical business deals, another suggested manipulated evidence to silence opposition. The revelation stunned her. Thomas was not just a husband who belittled her, he was a man hiding depths of deceit that threatened to unravel everything he had built. Mariana's mind raced. She held in her hands the proof of his duplicity, a weapon and a shield. Could she use this knowledge not only to protect herself but to turn the tide? Every instinct screamed caution. After all, retaliation could come with severe consequences. But for the first time, the possibility of confronting him, of reclaiming control, ignited a fierce hope within her. In the days that followed, Mariana meticulously documented everything, reaching out discreetly to trusted contacts and compiling evidence that could withstand scrutiny. She thought about her next steps with a blend of fear and determination. This was no longer just about vindication or revenge, it was about reclaiming her dignity and exposing the truth that Thomas had so cleverly concealed. Sometimes, the hardest battles begin quietly, beneath the surface, where no one can see the fire simmering under a woman's composed exterior. How often do we underestimate the strength hidden in those who seem broken? Mariana was learning that sometimes, the only way forward is to embrace the fight, even when you feel most alone. What would you do if you discovered the very person who shattered your world was living a lie far bigger than you imagined? Would you confront them or let the darkness consume you quietly? Days bled into restless nights as Mariana delved deeper into Thomas's secrets, her determination swelling in tandem with the risks she was beginning to face. The evidence she uncovered was damning, documents pointing to fraudulent deals, misleading investors, and deliberate cover-ups. Yet with every piece added to her growing dossier, the weight of potential fallout pressed harder on her conscience. To expose Thomas meant dismantling the very man who had once been intertwined with her life, the figure who had controlled not only her past but also her future in subtle, suffocating ways. One evening, while poring over a particularly incriminating set of emails, she heard the unmistakable sound of keys in the front door. Panic surged through her veins. Thomas was home earlier than expected. She quickly hid the folder of papers under a loose floorboard beneath the rug, her heart pounding like a desperate drumbeat. The sound of his footsteps drew nearer. She forced herself to steady her breathing, clutching the edge of the worn coffee table as if it could anchor her to the present moment. "Mariana," Thomas called out, his voice cooler than she anticipated. "We need to talk." She had anticipated confrontations, but not like this, so late, so quiet, with an edge of forced civility that twisted her stomach. Bracing herself, she rose and faced him in the dimly lit living room. He looked as composed as ever, his tailored suit immaculate, a mask carefully crafted to conceal turmoil beneath. Yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Could he sense she was on to something? "What do you want?" she asked, voice barely steady. "I've been hearing things, rumors," he began, each word measured. "I want to understand what you're up to, Mariana." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I'm trying to survive, Thomas. I'm tired of living in your shadow, of being your secret." She caught the briefest flash of anger cross his face before he stepped closer. "You should be careful who you threaten." The atmosphere thickened with tension. Suddenly, Thomas's smooth facade cracked, revealing the controlling, menacing man beneath. He whispered, "You think you can ruin me? You don't know what you're playing with." But Mariana no longer trembled. For the first time, she met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Maybe not. But I'm done hiding." The encounter left Mariana shaken yet emboldened. She knew Thomas would stop at nothing to protect his empire and his reputation. The peaceful life she desperately sought seemed further away than ever. Yet within her grew a quiet fire, fueled by years of suppression and a newfound purpose. Over the next weeks, Mariana carefully planned her next move. She reached out to a trusted journalist known for exposing corruption, someone who could ensure the information became public in a way that Thomas couldn't control. Each interaction was cloaked in secrecy, every message coded to avoid detection. The stakes were high. Discovery could result in threats, isolation, or worse. Meanwhile, Thomas's behavior grew unpredictable. At social gatherings, the charming facade remained intact, but his glances toward Mariana carried ominous warnings. Friends hinted at fractures between them, whispering about the divorce drama they hadn't seen coming. Mariana felt the dual pressure of public scrutiny and private menace tightening like a noose. Then came the night of the big gala, an event that epitomized Thomas's carefully curated image of power and respectability. Mariana was invited, not by choice but by a deliberate move from Thomas to demonstrate control and dominance. This would be the stage where their worlds collided most dramatically. Wearing a simple yet elegant dress, Mariana arrived with a calm demeanor that belied the tempest inside. The room buzzed with important figures, glittering chandeliers casting light on polished smiles and whispered ambitions. Thomas greeted her with a patronizing smile, his voice dripping with condescension as he announced her presence to the crowd. Just as the evening reached a crescendo, Mariana took a deep breath and stepped onto the makeshift stage where Thomas had boasted of their marriage. She held up a folder, the one with her revelation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as she began to speak, her voice clear and steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I'm not the woman you think I am. For years, I suffered in silence while lies were built around me. Tonight, I choose to show the truth." With that, she disclosed the documents, the emails, the facts, shattering the image Thomas had constructed so meticulously. The shock was palpable, a mixture of disbelief, outrage, and the sudden dismantling of a powerful man's facade. Thomas's face paled, his dominance stripped away before everyone. Some guests turned away, disgusted, others whispered about the scandal that was unraveling in real time. Mariana's heart raced, not from fear but from an overwhelming surge of liberation. What would you have done if your darkest secret became your greatest weapon? How far would you go to reclaim your story when the stakes were higher than ever? Sometimes, the line between victim and victor is thinner than we realize, and walking that line requires courage few possess. This was Mariana's moment, not just to confront the past, but to redefine her entire future. The days that followed Mariana's discovery of Thomas's secrets were filled with a growing sense of urgency and cautious determination. She couldn't help but feel the weight of every choice pressing down on her like an invisible chain, binding her in place yet urging her forward in equal measure. Thomas's facade of success was built on a fragile foundation of lies and deceit, and with every piece of evidence she uncovered, the picture of the man she thought she knew shattered into fragments she struggled to piece together. Late one night, as the quiet hum of the city enveloped her tiny apartment, Mariana sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by stacks of documents, emails, and photographs. Her eyes burned from strain, and her fingers trembled as she connected the dots. There were financial statements that didn't add up, whispers of fraudulent dealings hidden behind polished press releases, and a trail of manipulated records that threatened to topple Thomas's carefully curated empire. It was a web of lies so intricate and vast that to unravel it completely felt almost impossible. She was painfully aware that exposing these truths would come at a cost. Thomas was not just her ex-husband, he was a man who wielded power and influence like weapons. His network spanned across business and social circles, and his charm masked a ruthlessness that had kept her fearful and small for years. This was a man who would stop at nothing to protect his reputation, even if it meant silencing those who threatened it. Despite the risks, Mariana knew what she had to do. She reached out discreetly to a trusted journalist, someone known for their integrity and bravery in uncovering corruption. Their first meeting was tense and clandestine, held in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe far from the gleaming towers above. Mariana presented the evidence with a trembling voice but a firm resolve. The journalist listened intently, eyes widening as the layers of deceit unraveled one by one. "This could bring down a giant," the journalist said finally, folding the papers carefully. "But you need to be prepared. Men like Thomas don't fall quietly." Mariana nodded, feeling a flicker of apprehension but also a profound sense of purpose. For so long, she had lived in the shadows cast by his lies. Now, she would be the one shining a light on the truth. Meanwhile, Thomas's awareness of the shifting tides became increasingly evident. At their occasional encounters, his demeanor exuded a cold menace beneath his polished smiles. One evening, as they crossed paths at a mutual friend's dinner party, Thomas's gaze bore into her with a mixture of challenge and warning. "You're playing a dangerous game," he whispered when no one else was listening. Mariana met his stare steadily. "Maybe. But I'm done being your victim." The tension between them was palpable, a silent battle of wills fraught with unspoken threats. She sensed that Thomas would escalate his efforts to control her narrative, perhaps even resort to tactics far more insidious than mere manipulation. As the public gala approached, a glittering event where Thomas was scheduled to receive an industry award, Mariana found herself at a crossroads. The event was a showcase of Thomas's power and influence, an arena where his carefully crafted image reigned supreme. Yet it was also the perfect stage for the reckoning she envisioned. Despite her lingering doubts and fears, Mariana prepared herself for what would be the most significant confrontation of her life. She meticulously organized her evidence and rehearsed her words, understanding that once the truth was unleashed, there would be no turning back. When the night of the gala arrived, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation and luxury. Guests in elegant gowns and tailored suits mingled under sparkling chandeliers, their laughter masking the undercurrent of ambition and rivalry. Thomas moved among them like a king, greeting well-wishers with his signature charm. Mariana felt the eyes of the room flick to her as she entered, curiosity blending with skepticism. Her heartbeat thundered loud enough to drown out the music, but she held her head high, her presence a quiet defiance against the narrative Thomas had imposed on her for years. Taking advantage of a brief lull in the festivities, she stepped onto the stage reserved for speeches and accolades. Holding the folder of evidence firmly, she addressed the assembled crowd with a voice steady and clear, recounting her story not as a victim but as a witness to the truth. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience as details unfolded, details of betrayal, deception, and courage. Thomas's confident facade cracked visibly, disbelief flickered across his features before anger surged. Yet Mariana's resolve was unshakable. In that charged moment, she claimed not just her dignity but her power, turning the humiliation that once defined her into a weapon of liberation. The room, once enchanted by Thomas's illusion, now bore witness to his undoing. Have you ever imagined what it takes to shift from silence to strength, from being overshadowed to standing in full light? Mariana's journey reminds us that the path to reclaiming one's voice is forged through courage in the face of daunting darkness. What choices would you make if the one who broke you was the very one holding the key to your freedom?